My name is Jeremy. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But 5 years ago, I met a beautiful girl on a vacation trip I took with some friends to Miami, and I was so impressed with her that I ended up moving there. I thought I had found the love of my life and that I would be completely happy with her. But it didn't take long before I realized that I had made a big mistake. Instead of finding happiness in that city, I ended up finding my worst nightmare. I met Sophia in a bar in downtown Miami, one night when I was out with some friends having fun on our first day in that city. She was tall, dark, and had beautiful black hair. She was of Cuban descent, and from the first time I saw her, I was completely impressed with her. But I was even more so when I got to know her. She was super affectionate and had that Caribbean charm that doesn't go unnoticed anywhere. When we went out for the first time, it only took me one night to know that she was everything I was looking for in life. The perfect girl, the woman I waited all my life. That's why as soon as I returned to my city, I started to arrange everything to move to Miami with my Latin queen. At the beginning, everything was wonderful. She seemed to me that she was the best girlfriend in the world and everything was wonderful. But as time went by, what happens to many couples happened to us. We were wrapped up in routine. Each one noticed the defects of the other, and little by little things got so cold that all that feeling that at the beginning was so sparkling was reduced to almost nothing. It was a slow process, almost like a bucket that drips day by day until it empties completely. I hardly noticed that the relationship was slowly diminishing until at one point I realized that there was nothing left of us. We were like roommates, nothing more than that. We hardly spent any time together. Being intimate became a once-a-month event, and in the end, sleeping in the same bed as her became so depressing, I ended up staying on the couch. When I started calling the couch my bed, that's when I realized it was time to put an end to that agony, and so it happened. We finally broke up. However, I continued to live for a while in the apartment we had shared up to that point. It wasn't the best idea, but it was a long way from home, and I saw that it wasn't all bad, as we both took the matter maturely and agreed that we would respect each other's spaces. That's when I started talking to this girl through Reddit. Now, I should clarify that I was never unfaithful to my girlfriend. While we were together as a couple, I always respected that. It was just that when we broke up, I was so starved for affection and female attention that I sought it wherever I could. I wasn't confident in dating apps, it's not my thing. But the anonymity of Reddit seemed perfect for me. Eventually, this girl I met on the gaming sub exchanged number with me, and since then, we started talking. And everything went so well that I started planning to meet up with her. She lived in New York, but flying there to meet her didn't seem like a big deal. Not when she was so pretty, kind, and charming. I remember staying up late talking to her one night, trying to move on. I kept my voice down so my ex wouldn't hear me. We planned all the things we would do together, all the places she would take me, all the restaurants we were going to visit. This would be my first time in New York, and I was so excited to get to know the city and her. I went to sleep with a smile on my lips, but unfortunately I didn't wake up the same way. That night, I awoke to loud noises a few feet away from me in the TV room. At first I thought it was a burglar or something, but when I looked around it turned out it was her, my ex, and she was smashing my Xbox with a baseball bat. She was hitting over and over again, and I didn't understand what was going on. I yelled at her, asking her what she thought, what she was doing, and then I went to grab my phone so I could call the police. Only it wasn't on the coffee table where I normally carried it every night, it was nowhere in sight. That's when my ex started ranting about how I had been cheating on her. She was saying she already knew and not to try to deny it, or the next bat would be on me. And then she mentioned the girl on Reddit by name. Before she attacked me with the baseball bat, I fell backwards onto the couch trying to avoid the blow, and I narrowly did. But the whole spiel of mistakes I made and things she was going to beat me to death, For that she started throwing in my face really made me feel terror and seriously fear for my life. She chased me all over the apartment, throwing punches at me as hard as she could, until I finally managed to lock myself in our bathroom. At the time, I naively thought I could reason with her from the other side of the door, so I could explain to her that the Reddit girl was someone I started talking to after we broke up. But in reality, there wasn't much opportunity for that because she tried to break down the door. I'm still shocked at what he was doing. As hard as I tried, I couldn't get him to calm down, at least not enough to explain. Then, just when I thought I couldn't freak out anymore, she punched a hole in one of the wooden panels and proceeded to yell at me from there. Thank God it wasn't big enough for her to reach in and reach the doorknob, otherwise she would have been in serious trouble. The situation may sound funny to some, but believe me, it was a very scary thing for me, and I really came to fear for my integrity. She was too furious and was really ready to hit me with that bat. I could see it in her eyes. Fortunately, at one point, maybe because she got exhausted from so many sinister right-handed swings, she finally calmed down a bit, or at least enough to stop trying to kill me. But she wanted me out of the apartment that very night. I didn't even think about it. As soon as I could, I gathered everything, or rather threw some essential things in a bag and got out of there as fast as I could. I could imagine her sneaking up on me with a kitchen knife or something like that, and then just stabbing me in my sleep. So getting out of there that night was a way to save my life. When I told my friends about this, several of them asked me why I didn't restrain her, why I was so afraid of a girl, which seems to me the stupidest question in the world, and the answer is very simple. She had a baseball bat in her hands and she was using it with a lot of force. If she had managed to hit me in the right place, just like she wanted, I would have died, no matter what was or wasn't dangling between my legs. So I was very lucky that night she decided to smash my Xbox first, because I'm sure she was going to come after me next. That's why as soon as I had the chance, I got out of there like a bullet and drove to the nearest motel. That night I tried to sleep and get some rest to calm down the stress, but to no avail. The next morning I called my mom, who lives in West Virginia, told her everything, and stayed with her for a while until I could get back on my feet. I would have gone back to the apartment to get the rest of my stuff if I hadn't thought she had trashed or burned everything I owned. Besides, I was too happy to be out of there. When I was in college, I met a lovely woman named Aurora. She was a beautiful, intelligent, and very nice woman. From the first day we met, sparks flew between us, so it wasn't long before we started dating. Things between Aurora and I moved fast. I was young and naive, and she was the most captivating woman I had ever met in my entire life. I was at that age where you fall in love without reservation, and you are not able to see the red flags even if they hit you right in the face, and in Aurora's case, these did not take long to appear. As I got to know her, I began to realize that she was an extremely possessive person, and as our relationship progressed, she became more and more controlled. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rather, I found it cute that she felt jealous every time a girl approached me, and that she wanted to be with me all the time. But at a certain point, it started to become suffocating. She didn't like me spending time with my friends, and if there was another woman around, she would get angry and start to reproach me. She would also get aggressive at times, but then she would regain her composure. An important detail that I had not mentioned to you is that at that time I was 22 years old and Aurora was 39, so there was a significant age difference between the two of us. However, I couldn't care less about this. I felt that she was everything I was looking for. Plus, she was a very attractive woman, so I never stopped to think about it too much. However, later on, definitely that generation gap also started to take its toll, especially because she started to feel very insecure about me, since most of my friends were college classmates, and obviously they were girls who were in their full 20s, And, although she never admitted it directly, that jealous and controlling attitude only showed that she was very insecure about me. Controlling, it just showed that she felt very threatened, but she had absolutely no reason to feel that way, because I only had eyes for her, and most of my time was spent with her. But that was not the only thing that began to affect our relationship. Perhaps it was the most damaging thing. But there were other things, because unfortunately our age difference also came with marked differences in the way we each wanted to live our lives and the expectations we had of that relationship. I wanted to socialize. I wanted to party, go out with friends and enjoy life to the fullest. But this was something very different from what she wanted, because Aurora was at a different stage, and therefore, her habits and what she expected from me in the relationship was very different from what I wanted. She had this mentality that living life was just spending time alone together, and I had no major problem with that, especially in the beginning. I was in love, and nothing made me happier than spending the night with her and sharing of those sunrises with a hot coffee and toast in the kitchen. Those moments were perfect, and it felt wonderful for me to have that attention from her. But there were days when I wanted to go out and do other things, and she didn't want to. The point is that there came a time when these differences just got to be too much. The relationship was wearing down until it was no longer possible to go on with it. So we decided that the best thing to do was to separate, for the well-being of both of us, since neither of us was definitely giving the other what we really wanted. Although we did have differences and arguments, the truth is that our relationship ended peacefully. The breakup was by mutual agreement. I moved on with my life, although I won't deny that it certainly affected me, but I thought she had moved on too. Until about 3 weeks later, I received a text message from her saying, "I miss you so much." At this point, it was a bit heartbreaking to get that message, so I thought I would call her and we could talk about it. And when I did, I could tell she had been crying quite a bit, and I told her that I missed her too. That I had been thinking of calling her anyway to see how she was doing, and we just talked about nothing in particular, which seemed to cheer her up a bit. And when the conversation came to an end, she said to me, "I'm sorry for upsetting you like this and causing you trouble, but I really miss you a lot." I said, "Well, I haven't gone anywhere, and I will always be here for you if you need me." She replied, "If I need you tomorrow night to share dinner, would you be around?" I thought that was funny, so I laughed and replied, "Yes, when you need me, I will be around, but not tomorrow night, because I have classes." Immediately after I said these words to him, his tone changed drastically. He went from having that sweet and almost soulful voice to a more aggressive tone, and he asked me since when I had classes on Tuesday nights. This completely broke the atmosphere of a moment ago, but perhaps out of habit, I began to explain and told him that the term had changed, so my class schedule had changed the week before. I could tell her disbelief, and also that she was getting angry, as she always did when we were together, so I told her I could meet on Thursday, but she just dismissed it and said she would see if I was available, then hung up the call abruptly. At that point, I really felt annoyed by her reaction, but I figured it was just a side effect of her grieving over our breakup. The next night, I headed to the university to attend my class, and as I was walking to my car with some friends, to my surprise, she was standing there, leaning against my car, waiting for me. Unfortunately, at that moment, one of my friends, who is an inveterate joker, made a very unfortunate comment that was very audible, both to me and to Aurora, who was only a few feet away from us. He said, "Hey buddy, your mom is really hot." A moment later, we got to the car, and then my jaw almost dropped to the floor as Aurora walked up to my friend, and without saying a word, gave him a loud slap, followed by a spit in the face, then gave him, "I'm not her mother, you fucking asshole, but cheers to yours." We were all speechless for a few seconds. My friend just stood there looking at her, then at me with his mouth wide open. After those seconds of silence, the others just walked away from me without saying anything, probably to give me room to talk to her. 2 of them already knew her, and these took the Joker by the arm and led him away. When I was alone with her, I asked her what the hell she was doing, and she told me that my asshole friend deserved it for being disrespectful. I honestly agreed that it was disrespectful, but what she did was excessive. Plus, it's not right to physically assault another person. But then she went on to say that she didn't want me to see that jerk again, that she needed me to stay away from him right now. At that point, I lost my patience and asked her what she was doing on campus and why she thought she could control my life like that. Her response outraged me even more. She said she was there to make sure I was really in class, and lest I was lying to her. She said she didn't want to control my life, but she also didn't want to be influenced by people like the idiot from a moment ago, in her words. I laughed loudly, and then told her that my friend wasn't so wrong, as she was indeed behaving as if she were my mother, and that I didn't need her to raise me or protect me from anyone, as my own parents did that job for the first 18 years of my life. And now I was of age and had full right to do as I pleased. I could see she was furious when I told her this, but I didn't care. She and I were nothing anymore, so I just said goodnight, got in my car, and drove away, leaving her alone and with the word in her mouth. When I left, I thought I had made my point. I really thought she would leave me alone after that. I felt a little bad afterwards because I know what I said to her was rude, but her controlling attitude and aggression against my friend went too far. However, Aurora did not go under the table for my fault that night, and it is from this point that things went from being a nuisance to becoming something that I had never in my life expected to live through. After getting out of class that night, I was driving home completely unprepared, having completely forgotten about the whole thing from earlier in the day, as I was honestly more focused on the project I had to do for tomorrow's class than anything else. Unfortunately, that was enough of a distraction that I didn't even notice Aurora coming up behind me in her car, following me. I was about to enter my apartment complex when I just happened to glance in my rearview mirror, only to find Aurora looking at me through her front glass with an expression of pure fury, and her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles were white. At that moment, I panicked somewhat, and an alarm in my head went off telling me that this was not going to end well. And if I had known how bad it was really going to end, I would have driven to the nearest police station and not to my house. Arriving at my apartment complex, I parked the car and quickly got out, hoping to have a conversation with this demon woman, who until recently I thought was a good person. I grabbed my backpack and simply stood there on the sidewalk, watching as she backed into an empty spot in front of me. At that moment, I raised my arms as if asking, "What do you want from me?" Basically, I felt defeated at that point. This woman was getting on my nerves and didn't seem to be willing to give up on me. After a few moments of me just standing there under the glare of her headlights and her not getting out of the damn car, I motioned to her, "Well then, forget it. I'm off to my apartment." I turned around to go into the building, but just as I was about to walk towards the entrance, I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine revving up and tires screeching loudly. At first, I thought he was just going to accelerate the car and drive off burning tires, but I was completely stunned when I saw that he was not turning the steering wheel, but was accelerating and coming straight towards me. At that moment, I panicked, because at this point I wouldn't be at all surprised if Aurora really tried to run me over. Fortunately for me, the distance between me and where she was parked was enough for me to at least throw myself out of the way and avoid being run over by my deranged ex-girlfriend. But unfortunately for her, I was standing exactly in front of the building's swimming pool, and when she stepped on the accelerator, she did it with so much force that she could hardly apply the brakes in time to avoid hitting the small fence surrounding the pool, which was right behind me. I'm sure that in the midst of her fury, the idea of running me over with her car clouded her judgment so much that she didn't even have an exit strategy, because when I jumped out of the way and she kept going at full speed, she crashed into the weak fence, completely knocking it down, and her car went straight into the pool. At that moment, I ran by inertia to where she was, to try to pull her out of the car before she sank and drowned like a fool. I couldn't help but go to her aid, even though she had just tried to kill me in a horrible way. But as soon as I got close, I noticed that she wasn't hurt at all. I saw her open the car door and get out of the pool. She looked like she was really lost and confused, but after swimming to the edge, she ran out across the parking lot, and then I saw her cross the sidewalk. Just as I thought, she didn't really have an escape plan. She was just blinded by anger, and all she was thinking about was finishing me off. At that moment, I could really realize how mentally messed up this woman was, and I was relieved to have gotten her out of my life. Because judging by what she did that night, I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the middle of one of her usual bouts of jealousy, she had maybe stabbed me in my sleep. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911, explaining what had just happened and saying that they needed to send someone right away. I was even nice enough to mention that they should send a doctor just in case. I also gave them Aurora's description and told them she had fled the scene, but I wasn't sure if she was injured or not. A few minutes later, the authorities arrived, and I learned that they had intercepted her as she ran down the sidewalk completely soaked, put her in handcuffs, and took her away. I then had to accompany the policeman to the police station to give my statement and make the formal complaint. I was really very surprised at her behavior. I always knew she was jealous, controlling, and had a bit of a difficult temper, but I never imagined she would be capable of going to such lengths. I kept thinking about what the hell she intended to do after running me over, because if she had succeeded, she still would have hit the fence and fallen into the pool, and if she hadn't been as lucky as she was, maybe she would end up drowning at the bottom of that same pool. And if not, she would still leave behind a bunch of evidence that would easily tell the police who had committed the crime, and she would end up spending her whole life in prison. After the incident, Aurora received a huge lawsuit for property damage from the owners of the complex, to which was added the complaint for trying to run me over, because although I hesitated at first, I had to report it. I honestly don't know how it all ended with the financial issue and the payments to the building. I only knew that she did not go to prison, since the court determined that she was not mentally well at the time of committing the acts, so she was forced to receive psychological help. Something that really makes me happy. But since then, I never heard anything more about Aurora. What I'm going to tell you happened 5 years ago. At that time, I had been dating a girl for a couple of months. We had dated before, 2 years before that, but at that time I felt I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. However, 2 years later, we met again and decided to try again. This time, the relationship progressed quite fast. Things between us were going very well. She was a great girl and I really liked her, but I always felt that there were some things about her past about which she was not being completely honest, and this was the beginning of the chaos that came later. I'm not going to say her real name to protect her identity, so we're going to call her Gina. Gina was divorced and had a son from that marriage. As I told you before, this time the relationship progressed quickly, and we began to take it to something more serious. Although our relationship was good, over time I began to notice that when she talked about her ex and their breakup, it was in an emotional way. That is, it was perceived as if she still had deep-seated feelings for that person, despite the damage he did to her, as if she had never fully gotten over him. However, every time I confronted her about it, she would always give me the same response, something along the lines of, "Well, he's my son's father. I'm just trying to be on good terms with him so my son can see that his parents get along." At first, I tried to be understanding and to convince myself that maybe I was being paranoid, and I honestly didn't want to be the typical jealous boyfriend of his girlfriend's ex. However, I couldn't overlook the fact that she talked about this guy all the time, as if he was someone present in her life, and that truly bothered me. But I was in love and really wanted to make things work, so I tried to overlook this. I know that overlooking something so obvious was stupid of me, but I guess I did it because I'm a hopeless romantic, and I believed in giving this woman the benefit of the doubt. I just hoped that someday she would stop talking about him, but she didn't, so one day I said, "Listen, if we're going to have a relationship, you're going to have to stop giving this man so much access to your life. I know you have a child and whatever else you want, but this man is too present for you to be just an ex." After this conversation, she seemed to consider my words and finally stopped mentioning the ex. Finally, things seemed to be going well. Then one night I had arranged with her to go visit her at her house. She lived in another city, an hour and a half away. By then, things were starting to go seriously. I told her that I wanted to marry her, and that I wanted to get to know her son on a more personal level, start spending more time with him, and that he was adapting to me, since we had planned that I would move with her to her city, so it was important that her son would adapt more to my presence, and that he would not see me as an intruder in her house. Little John was 8 years old. He already knew me and was fond of me, but he always called me sir. I really wanted to marry his mother and form a family with them, so it was time to stop being him sir, and establish enough trust at least for him to call me by my name. But let's get to what happened that night. That Friday night we were watching movies, playing video games, and having a great time. John and I talked quite a bit. He asked me some questions about my life, and I asked him some questions about his. The usual. We talked about the things he likes, who his friends were, the things he wanted to do when he grew up, and things like that. The thing is that during the whole evening, his dad, Gina's ex, was talking to the boy on FaceTime all night. At first, I didn't think it was strange. I am also a separated father, and it is quite normal for a father who lives far away from his son to communicate with him by FaceTime, and to be aware. The problem with this man is that he called every 5 or 10 minutes, while I was with Gina on the couch talking or doing things. It was as if he was trying to spy on us, to know what was going on, or to listen to our conversations using his son as an excuse. However, once again I tried to let it go, as I really didn't want to make John uncomfortable. Finally, after a night of fun and games, I kissed Gina goodnight and got ready to go home. I got in my car and prepared to take the hour-and-a-half drive to my hometown. By then it was after 11 p.m., so I left the apartment complex and plugged in my GPS. To get out to the avenue, I first had to take an obscure road, turn left, then right, and then take the main road. This was a small residential complex, and as it was almost midnight, there were almost no cars on the road. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside me, and I noticed that there was someone in my peripheral vision trying to get my attention by waving his arms. I turned around and saw a large man wearing a brown jacket and appearing to be very angry and agitated as he kept trying to get my attention. I finally turned around to see what it was about. I had encountered this on other occasions. I thought it was one of those times when someone is trying to tell you that you have a flat tire or something hanging off their car. So I pull over to the side and finally ask him what's wrong. I said, "Can I help you, sir?" At that moment, the guy started yelling at me, "Hey, I need to talk to you right now." That took me by surprise because it was the first time in my life that I saw that guy. I answered him saying, "Hello, brother. I don't know you. I don't know who you are, so I have no problem with you." Then I roll up the window and keep driving. Then I see in the rearview mirror that he keeps waving at me, and he gets progressively angrier and angrier. At that moment, my adrenaline started to rise and my heart was pounding. This guy positioned himself right next to me and stuck his head out the window. Now he says to me, "Hey asshole, I need to talk to you right now. You stop, or I'll stop you. That's when I started to panic, because I didn't have my gun in the car, and the guy could have been armed. At that point, there were almost no cars on the road, and it was pitch black. This situation was really freaking me out. The guy yelled at me to meet him at the gas station down the street to, according to him, settle our unfinished business. I finally agreed, but I really had no intention of doing such a thing. I just did it to throw him off the scent. At that point, the guy pulls out in front of me with the intention of me following him, then goes for a U-turn, and I agree to follow behind him. But seeing him pull into the gas station, instead of doing the same, I stepped on the gas and just let him off at the interstate. After going a few miles and making sure I had completely lost him, it was there that I called Gina and asked her if her ex was in the area. I had seen pictures of him before and finally realized it was the same asshole. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I rebuked my girlfriend and told her what the guy had just done, she told me that as soon as I left, he came by the house and then started to complain to her for letting a stranger meet her son. I later found out that he was parked in the parking lot all night, lurking in the dark, while talking on FaceTime with John, meaning he had been spying on us all night. This was all too much to process. My heart was pounding, and I was completely horrified by this whole situation and how dangerous it could become. But the final straw was that when I confronted Gina about all this on my way home, she was very condescending and even tried to justify the psycho for his behavior. At one point, she simply said, "Oh, he can be like that sometimes, but I swear he wasn't going to do anything to you. He was just trying to talk to you." I guess I don't even have to clarify that I was furious with her, because not only did she not take him seriously, but this whole situation could have cost me my life. Who the hell knows what that psycho would have done to me if I hadn't lost it? I may never know. And honestly, I don't care either. I have 2 children who could have lost their father that night because of the jealousy of a psycho ex-boyfriend. 2 days later, I saw Gina again, but this time I sent that relationship to hell. I wasn't willing to deal with her ambiguity anymore, let alone her sick ex. Hello, my name is Michael, and almost 10 years ago, I had to deal with the resentment of an ex who was the epitome of pure evil. I met Jenna when I had just moved to Florida with my mother and brother. At the time, she was working as a nurse at a downtown hospital, which I went to after bending my ankle after falling off a ladder. Anyway, the fact is that as soon as we saw each other, we fell in love immediately, and soon we started dating. Jenna at first was a lovely and sweet girl, a dream of a girlfriend. But over time, I discovered that she was actually a tremendously toxic and narcissistic person. Not that I was a saint, but she really was someone with whom living together was simply exhausting. I will not go into details of all the disastrous things that happened between us. I will just summarize it by saying that we did not end well at all, although after a while we talked about it. And let's say that we half fixed it and we were even, but each one very, very much on his own side. However, 6 months after our definitive breakup, I received a call from her. At first, I didn't recognize the number, because I had changed my cell phone provider not long before. Besides, I have never liked answering calls from unknown numbers. But since I was in college, I used to receive calls from professors, finance people, and classmates inviting me to look for games, dorms, and things like that. So I decided to answer, although with some nervousness, hoping it was for something good. As soon as I hit the receive call button, I recognize the voice immediately, and as soon as I do, I feel my heart sink. I hadn't given Jenna my new number, and I had every reason not to, so I wondered how she had gotten it. Knowing I couldn't just cut her off, as it would be too obvious, I greeted her matter-of-factly with a simple hello. Then she told me we needed to talk, to which I replied that I'm sure we really have nothing to talk about. We were already more than 6 months apart, and hadn't spoken since then. which is enough for each of us to be out of each other's lives. Immediately after I tell her that, she responds with, "What do you mean no? Of course we need to talk. I have something very important to tell you." Upon hearing these words, the first thing that came to my mind was, she is pregnant. That was my initial thought, and I won't lie to you, I felt my knees going weak. So I sat back in my seat, feeling my heart racing in my chest and my hands getting wet, preparing myself to hear the bad news. But what he told me next left me completely stunned. "We have a patient in the emergency room for a car accident, and unfortunately she didn't make it. I'm so sorry, but she was your mom." Jenna was still working as a nurse in the ER, and receiving this news completely destroyed me. I was in shock, and I could feel my heart in the pit of my stomach. This couldn't be true. My mother couldn't be dead. Just a few hours ago we were having breakfast together in the kitchen. God, I was completely devastated inside. For some reason I tried to call her cell phone, but she didn't answer. Of course she didn't answer. So I hung up to call my little brother and tell him the devastating news. He was speechless for a moment, but then burst into desperate crying and screaming. We were both equally devastated. We were now alone in the world, and we only had each other, as our father passed away when we were kids. My brother told me that Mom had left about an hour ago in her car and was headed to Walmart. He was very sorry that he hadn't taken advantage of his last moments with her, and so was I. I thought about how unpredictable death can be, and for a moment I felt very grateful to Jenna for taking the trouble to let me know ahead of time. And I also felt a little bad that I hadn't given her my number. She probably got it from my mom's phone. My brother and I cried like babies as we agreed to go pick up our mother's body, and feeling very afraid of the state we might find her in. I can't even describe how I felt at that moment. This was absolutely devastating. My brother and I stayed on the phone for a few minutes just sobbing and giving each other support before we had to go to the hospital where Mom's body was and face the terrible reality. But suddenly, while I was still crying on the phone, I heard my brother yell out, "Mom, Mom, you're okay, God, you're alive." I jumped up from the bench where I was sitting and almost fell over from the impulse. Then I hear my mother's voice on the other end of the phone, asking my brother what was wrong and why he was crying. Turns out Mom wasn't dead, nor had she had any accident. She just walked in the door super confused as to what was going on, because my soulless witch of an ex-girlfriend had lied to me. And when I confronted her about it, the very sick woman told me she did it because she wanted to hurt me. Quote, "Just like I hurt her when I left her." Jesus Christ. This made me remember the reason why I decided to break all ties with this psychopath and try to keep her as far away from my life as possible. And the worst thing is that she had the nerve to laugh in my face, or rather, in my ear, and regret not having been able to be there to record me. And so every time she remembered that I broke her heart, according to her, watch the video and feel better. Because if evil has a name, I'm pretty sure it's Jenna. Before I start telling you my story, I must warn you that there are some very disturbing things and that several of the actions this person committed are truly creepy and disgusting to say the least, so it is not suitable for sensitive people. By clarifying this, you can imagine the level of hell I went through thanks to my ex. It all started one summer afternoon when I was walking in the park to try to clear my mind as I was in exam time and felt the pressure was driving me crazy. That afternoon, in the purest style of the best Hollywood romantic movies, I stumbled upon this beautiful girl and almost fell to the ground. This was our first meeting, and that day, after apologizing to her for tripping her, I asked her out for coffee. She accepted, and since then we started dating. I could say it was love at first sight, and I was really convinced that this girl had come to measure for something. She was charming, beautiful, and at first seemed to be everything any man looks for in a woman. Her name was Hannah. She had blonde hair and beautiful brown eyes, so expressive that I was immediately captivated. Things between Hannah and I progressed very fast, and I was convinced that I had found the love of my life. I even imagined the moment when I would tell our children how it was that fate made us collide head-on one summer afternoon tucked in nature, but instead, I ended up here telling a bunch of strangers how it was that this psycho almost destroyed my whole life. Hannah and I were together for almost 2 years, and our relationship was a complete roller coaster. At first, everything was wonderful. She convinced me that she was a beautiful soul, a caring, loving, and altruistic, kind person, and I couldn't have been more in love. But little by little, our relationship became disastrous. She was an extremely jealous, manipulative, and very abusive person. When she would get angry, she would turn into the most hurtful witch that could exist, but then she would go back to being the sweet, beautiful girl I had fallen in love with. She would apologize, she would victimize herself, and I don't know how she did it, but she always managed to make me feel guilty for her aggressions towards me. When I didn't do what she said, or what she wanted me to do without her asking me to do it, she used to go crazy. She would get aggressive, insult me, throw things at me, say hurtful things, and make me feel like complete trash. But when I got fed up and wanted to end the relationship, she would come back, apologize, acknowledge that she had overreacted, and made me believe that she felt really bad about her actions, and that from now on everything was going to change, but always dropping the thorn that it was my behavior that made her get that way. Then she would be the most wonderful and lovely girl for a few weeks or even months, but then everything would go into a tailspin again. This was our routine for almost 2 years of our relationship, until one day, after a really horrible argument, I just reached my limit and told Hannah that I couldn't take it anymore. I ended up telling her that I couldn't deal with the hell our relationship had become. I told her that we needed to separate once and for all, because at this point, we were only hurting each other, as everything that originally brought us together was completely gone, and I had reached my limit of tolerance. Of course, he begged me not to do it, and promised me 1,000 times that this was just a juncture and that he was going to put his all into making things work, the same things he always said and did when it got to this point. But this time it would not be so easy, and I let him know. I told him that I had already made a decision, and that there was no turning back. As you can imagine, this was a complicated breakup, full of anger, resentment, and many open wounds. But I was sure it was the best thing for both of us, since our relationship was completely unsustainable. Basically, the moments of anger and drama far outweighed the moments of happiness. This was just prolonging an agony in vain, because in the end, no one there was happy. Finally, she seemed to understand, and we went our separate ways. We had been separated for about 3 months, and I thought things were finally starting to change. I was finally starting to really move on. She stopped texting me and leaving me messages with our mutual friends, and we pretty much stopped talking altogether. So everything seemed to indicate that that dark chapter of our lives was finally over. While I felt I had healed enough, I still didn't feel ready to date anyone new. Instead, I was enjoying my alone time, just hanging out with friends, focusing on my work, and being myself for the first time in a long time. Hannah, on the other hand, apparently hadn't reached that point yet. One night, I was suddenly awakened by what I thought was the sound of a door opening in my apartment. I jumped out of bed in alarm, but as I began to regain consciousness, I wasn't sure if I had actually heard the door, or if it was just a sound I had heard in my dreams. I realized that maybe I was overreacting for nothing, so I rolled over and sat on the edge of the bed, just paying attention to my surroundings, to see if I could hear any sign that there was anyone in my apartment. But after a couple of minutes of being there, I was pretty convinced that it was just a sound that snuck into my dream. But I was already awake, so I decided to get up and go to the bathroom. I opened my bedroom door, and as soon as I got to the hallway, I smelled a foul, absolutely nauseating smell. This smell was so strong and pungent that it turned my stomach all over, and I felt like I was going to throw up right there. But after I pulled up my sleeping sweater to cover my nose to avoid throwing up, I realized that this smell was the smell of rotting flesh, as if there was something dead in my apartment. The first thing that came to my mind was that it was a mouse or something similar. But when I turned on the light in the hallway, I looked towards my living room, and I realized that I was very wrong, because there, on my beautiful velvet sofa, was lying as the corpse of a rabbit, with much of its internal organs out of its body. Clearly, this animal was put there on purpose. Besides, it had to have several days without life because it was completely rotten. As soon as I saw that, I quickly stepped back, getting tangled with my own feet and falling backwards to the floor. Then I got up and ran to the front door. I opened it suddenly, expecting to find the person who had done this still in the hallway, but he was already gone. After all, he had enough time to escape. Needless to say, this scared the hell out of me. Who wouldn't be? An intruder had entered my apartment and left a dead animal on my living room sofa. And he did all this while I was sleeping in my bed. That is, if he had wanted to attack me, he would have done it without any problems. I immediately called the police, and when the officer arrived, it took me a while to explain to him exactly what had happened. I hurriedly explained that I had heard the sound of my door closing, that I had then gone outside and turned on the light, and after that I saw the rabbit, and that there was no one in the hallway when I checked. The truth is that the officer seemed to be just as puzzled as I was. He asked me if I had any enemies or anyone I had had a problem with recently. Obviously, I told them no, as the truth is I don't have any enemies. And in the last few days I had only been concentrating between my work and my studies, and I hadn't had any altercation with anyone. He took my statement, the evidence, and told me that they would do everything they could to find out who had done this, but warned me that he didn't have many leads. At the time, none of this made any sense. A dead rabbit had no connection to Hannah for me. I just didn't know how to put the pieces of that strange puzzle together. And I also didn't believe her capable of doing something so macabre and disgusting at the same time. But that was until the afternoon of the next day, when I was getting ready to deliver the shift, and I received a text message from an unknown number that said, "Hope you liked your gift. Sincerely, your bunny." That's when it all started to make sense, as Hannah always wanted me to call her Bunny. I hated that nickname, but she liked it. She said that's what her dad called her when she was a little girl, and she thought it was too cute. I, on the other hand, found it too disturbing that a girl would want her boyfriend to call her by the same nickname her dad gave her when she was little, even more so due to the fact that her dad had passed away when she was a little girl. That was crazy, a pretty disturbing one. I immediately called the police and reported what had happened. However, the number was anonymous, and she adamantly denied being the perpetrator of all this, so nothing could be done as they could not act without proof. For the next few days, I found myself living in a state of constant paranoia. Every time I heard any noise at night, I would jump out of bed thinking she was breaking into my apartment. I would also constantly check the doors and windows, up to 3 and 4 times a night, to make sure she wasn't lurking around. I would look through the blinds to see if he would suddenly appear, thinking he was going to do something else. I know this may seem far-fetched, as at this time I had only done the rabbit thing, but it was more about the fact that she had somehow breached the security of my home, and I didn't know how, and that was the main reason for my paranoia. I have, in fact, in the following days changed the lock, but that didn't make me feel any safer, as the one I was in had already changed it. One night, I was lying in bed looking up at the ceiling, unable to sleep, when I heard what I thought was the sound of my door slamming shut. It was 1 a.m. and I lived alone, so there was no reason for anyone to come into my apartment, unless of course it was Hannah doing another one of her things. I stood up and slowly approached my bedroom door. I looked down the poorly lit hallway, and there was indeed someone in my apartment. and it didn't take much to know it was Hannah. She had long hair, the same figure, and the same height. If I'm honest with you, I was so overwhelmed that night I don't remember everything that happened beyond the fact that I ran out of my room, threw her to the floor, and then grabbed my phone to call 911. Meanwhile, she was screaming at the top of her lungs that I was trying to kill her. This surely to make the 911 operator think that I was the aggressor in this situation. However, I kept her on the ground until the police arrived a few minutes later, and I made it clear to the officers that if I was on top of her, it was because I was holding her down so she wouldn't run away, because I was aware that the scene could be misconstrued as she was screaming for help like crazy, and several of my neighbors had posted themselves at the door to see what was going on. However, I was pleased to see that one of the officers was the same one from the other night when the rabbit incident occurred. The officers entered the apartment with their gun drawn, and she started screaming that I had kidnapped her and taken her to my apartment, and she also told them that I was trying to sexually assault her and kill her later. Fortunately, this was too far-fetched, and this officer knew me and was aware of the case. Plus, if my intentions were what she said, why would she call 911 in the first place? Fortunately, the police took over the situation and took her under arrest, while she was screaming all over the hallway that she was arresting the wrong person, and that she was the victim in all of this. But after much screaming and being pushed into the back of the squad car, she fortunately calmed down a bit, but kept saying that I was a murderer and that I had a criminal record, but then went from that to threatening them, saying she would be out soon and would find them and get revenge. That was absolutely crazy. Then she said that the day she got out she would come back to finish the job, and that I would never get rid of her. But if this sounds like a complete madhouse to you, you won't believe what this woman had in her backpack, which, by the way, I never got to see, maybe because I was so busy in the struggle, trying to keep her still until the police arrived, that I never realized she was carrying a backpack. But the cops did, and when they took it from her, she started screaming like the crazy woman she was to get it back. But instead, the cops opened it, and what they found inside left me cold. Inside the backpack, Hannah had a huge kitchen knife wrapped in a piece of cloth, a bottle of bleach, a pair of surgical gloves, duct tape, and black garbage bags. After learning this, I first froze for a moment, and then I realized how close this woman came to fulfilling her plans. After this, Jana had to face trial for attempted murder. I don't remember exactly how many years she was sentenced to, but definitely enough to ruin a good part of her life. After this scary incident, I ended up moving to another state, and to be honest, I did this to keep her from finding me when I got out. It's been over 10 years since that, and I'm still paranoid about the locks on my doors and windows. And now I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment, so I know the only way in is through the front door, a door I keep locked, deadbolted and chain anchored to the wall at all times.